Hello everyone, John Dale here. Today I'm here to talk to you about Alan Wake. Alan Wake is a psychological action thriller released by Remedy Entertainment. Remedy was coming off their previous success, Max Payne, released in 2001, but after selling the rights to Max Payne to Take-Two Interactive in 2002, and the release of Max Payne 2 in 2003, they set out to develop a new intellectual property. First seen at E3 in 2005, the reveal trailer showed Wake sporting a different attire than we would eventually come to know, and being chased by cloaked figures as he struggled to make it to the lighthouse before the night hit. At the time, the game was said to be releasing to all next-gen consoles and PC, though in 2006, Remedy partnered with Microsoft Game Studios to release the game exclusively to Xbox 360 and later PC. Originally, the game was planned to be a sandbox-style game, with Bright Falls, the town the game is set in, would be a big open world for the player to explore. But this idea was scrapped after only a few months for a more linear story experience. The game was released 5 years after the initial reveal at E3 in May 2010. The game begins with a dream, or a nightmare I should say. It serves as a tutorial to help introduce the enemies of the game. The shadow-soaked killers known as the Taken offer an interesting challenge. In order to kill them, first you have to eliminate their shadow barrier by flooding them with light before gunning them down, which ups the challenge and makes you have to focus on each target individually instead of just spraying bullets.
Shh, baby, just another nightmare. Everything's fine. You dozed off.
Soon after, you find Alan and his wife Alice on a ferry to the small town of Bright Falls for a vacation and a hopeful cure to Alan's writer's block that's plagued him for 2 years. Once a successful writer, Alan wrote many books focusing on a gritty New York detective that holds a striking resemblance to Remedy's previous protagonist, Max Payne. You can even find Easter eggs towards this throughout the game, including a part from his book The Sudden Stop depicting the death of the book's main character, which is narrated by the voice of Max Payne, who also voices characters in Alan Wake. After interacting with some of the locals, the two head to a mysterious cabin on Cauldron Lake to spend their vacation. But once the sun goes down and the lights go out, Alice disappears and Alan wakes up in a crashed car on the side of the road a week later, with no memory of the time missing. That's when you get your first taste of the woods after dark. The majority of the game is spent in the wilderness at night, with nothing but a flashlight and a glimmer of distant structures and checkpoints as your only reprieve from the horrors that await you in the darkness. Upon entering the woods for the first time, you find your first page to the manuscript entitled Departure, which is written by Alan himself, who has no memory of doing so. With each page you find, you are treated to the voice actor cast to play Alan Wake, reading the contents in a way you'd expect most writers would.
The flashlight was heavy in my hand, and each pull of the trigger sent a painful shock up my arm. But I was finally out of the woods and things were looking up. That's when I heard the chainsaw.
After you come across the first few pages, you begin to find a very strange connection to what is happening around you and the words on the manuscript. Some can give you mild spoilers of things to come, while others help to flesh out different characters and scenes not quite expanded on through the gameplay. It's a clever way to add to the game experience, which only lasts around 10 to 12 hours, excluding all DLC episodes. There are some collectibles to help extend the playtime, or possibly warrant another playthrough, but once you complete the story, you likely won't need to replay it right away. Although the story, characters, and atmosphere will likely bring you back to re-experience it again in the future. As for collectibles, there are a plethora of manuscript pages to collect, with some pages only able to be collected in the harder difficulties. Thermoses to collect, beer can pyramids to knock over, loot crates to pillage, radio shows to listen to, and short TV episodes of the fictional show entitled Night Springs.
Tonight's episode, The Man in the Mirror.
The core gameplay sees Alan Wake traversing various locations, mainly at night, while facing off against numerous taken and possessed objects in order to reach various goals and unravel the narrative mysteries along the way. There are also various sequences to break up the action, which usually take place once the sun comes up, where generally you get to explore a set location and interact with NPCs to further the story or simply add to the atmosphere. The inclusion of these scenes, as well as the in-game cutscenes and the break between episodes, leaves the game feeling fresh most of the way through. Just as the formula begins to get old, the game concludes. Having the game set up like a TV program with bookends to each episode complete with episode recaps doesn't have the impact you may expect, however. It more so just works as set places to stop playing or take breaks if so desired. For a game that came out in 2010, the graphics still hold up fairly well. Although every hair on the characters' heads aren't rendered individually like you might find today, the details that are there are very high quality. There are quite a bit of fine details as well. Take a walk through the woods and you'll begin to notice all the foliage and how it sways in the breeze or is covered by a light layer of mist, all adding to the atmosphere. Although not all textures look as high quality, such as the ground or wood planks, it hardly takes you out of the experience. The one aspect of the graphics that really shines is the lighting. From the way the moonlight spottily illuminates your trail as you traverse the woods at night, to the breathtaking views you get when the sun is up, all of it does its job of making the world feel real. The sound design also holds up well, with the voice acting being top-notch and the sound effects filling out the atmosphere nicely. The narration by Wake can feel a little wooden at times, leaving the impact of more intense dialogues coming across as more funny than scary, but it doesn't subtract much from the experience.
Hearing her voice, what she was saying made me happy and sick and guilty all at once. Worst of all, I recognized the words. The phone call from her. It had been a cut-up of this.
The soundtrack is also well done, with orchestral scores coming in during intense moments or narrative scenes, as well as a fully licensed soundtrack you hear on radio stations and at the end of every episode. Unfortunately, having licensed music in the game has brought about the fall of Alan Wake. The license to use the music in the game has sinceforth expired, so as of May 16th, 2017, the game has been pulled from most stores, including Steam. With the game nearly 10 years old already, it is unlikely the publishers will renew the music licenses, meaning the game may be lost to potential new customers until the music becomes public domain. But there is always hope the legal issues may be fixed, letting the game hit stores again in the future. Although this does affect the main game and 2 DLCs which expand the story, it doesn't affect the standalone expansion, American Nightmare, which serves as more of a hint of what the developers wanted to do for the sequel, before they got moved to working on the new IP, Quantum Break. Being a thriller, the game lacks most scares and gore most horror titles are known for these days. Instead, it is rich in creepy atmosphere. More than once, you'll find yourself alone in the woods at night, hoping to run into a well-lit structure or populated gas station to help cut the tension and leave room to breathe. Although as the game progresses, the lights at the end of the path become fewer and far between. This works well for the most part, but where it gets frustrating is with the enemies. There are only a few different enemy types, each offering different levels of challenge to overcome them, but by midway through the game you will have encountered them all. So in order to up the challenge in the last chapters, they throw large amounts of enemies at you at once over and over, while limiting your weapons and ammo. This is my one big complaint about the game, that in its last moments the gameplay becomes less action thriller and more of a grind as you face wave upon wave of enemies. And unfortunately, the 2 DLC chapters which continue the story after its extremely open conclusion do not change this formula. Alan Wake is a bit of an enigma in the sense that if you enjoy action thriller games with strong mystery narratives that are well written, I highly recommend it, but currently, unless you already own the game, it'll be very hard to get your hands on. And if you do already own it, you've likely played through it and have made up your own mind on the title. So if you're thinking of replaying through and wondering if it still holds up, the answer is yes. And for the others, hopefully one day this game will resurface from the darkness so others can venture into the world and mind of Alan Wake. Thanks for watching, and be sure to like and subscribe if you want to see more videos like this. I'm John Dale, and I'll catch you next time.